is about the same weight. There were 2 small containers containing this water. The food consisted of some very small cubes of little wafers that, when put into boiling water in a gallon container, actually puffed up and filled over the sides. We fed them to guinea pigs, but we didn't try them up ourselves. From the outside, fitted so closely that it was not until after the door had come open. There was a knob on the inside of the door about that size on the wall, and there was a knob on it. And when that was pushed against, a door flew open. But from the outside, it was impossible to determine the presence of a door. Now, gentlemen, there wasn't a rivet, there wasn't a bolt, there wasn't a nut, a screw of any kind in this entire ship. The material of which the ship was constructed, 2 of the materials, there's not been any headway made as to determining what they can be or what they are. All of the tests, including some 10,000 degrees of heat applied, have not been able to melt down this metal. Yet, on the big ship, 2 men could raise up one side of the ship or one edge of it. It was that light. And they could stand on top of it, 12 people, and no effect of any kind appear. There was a circular gear between this point here and that point, entirely surrounding the ship. Now, I didn't know that our gear ratio system, which I understand was developed in Sweden, was what we call the 3-5 ratio. The gears on this ship were a 3-6 ratio, which in no way allowed for any backlash. There wasn't a lubricant of any kind that we could find. Since we couldn't generate any heat, and since there was no backlash, there was no wear. The saucer whirled around the cabin. The cabin stood still. Now, it's our judgment that the oxygen inside the cabin was produced magnetically, because we can produce today in the laboratory oxygen magnetically. Now, a second ship landed. And that ship was the 72-foot ship. And the door was open. And the 16 little people in that ship were all dead. But the color of their skin was the same as yours and mine. Their uniforms were the same. All their features all indicated that they were the same people. Every type of examination to which they were placed was that the case. Now, in some manner, they had died because it was evident they'd only been dead 2 or 3 hours. The probabilities are that in opening the door, they subjected themselves to what you and I would call the bends by reason of work, for example, in the tunnels under the river at New York. Because, and in that ship we found the first evidence of sleeping quarters. It's very interesting how it happened. It'll be impossible for me to sketch just how this appeared, because you must remember that the entire cabin is circular. But there was what appeared to be inserted back into the wall. When pulled out, it was a screen. And when that came around to meet the wall here, why, hanging on the wall of this thing were little bunks. And as that closed, they automatically dropped. So apparently, if they wanted to have a place for sleeping, when they got here and pulled it from this side, why, their bunks automatically dropped. When they pushed it back, they raised up. Now, why they had that idea, we don't know, because in the big ship, there wasn't such a thing. But they probably have 1950 models and 1949 models, just like we have, and therefore they were trying to experiment, because the third ship landed. Now comes the interesting thing. This ship only had two little fellows on it. They sat in little seats, little bucket seats, in front of their control boards, which set it at an angle and only contains push buttons. That's all any of these ships had, is just push buttons. The little fellow that was half out of the escape door, as we call it, had also died. The little fellow sitting in the seat simply slumped over and his head was on his chest, and there they sat. Therefore, you can imagine that the scientist who had now seen and examined 34 of these people were rather blue and disconcerted because of the fact that none of them were alive. Now, were they alive, the probabilities are they would not have landed unless they had the means of getting away in case of detection or anybody coming upon them. It was some time after these three incidents. Oh, I must go back to this little ship. The little ship had what none of the other two had, and that was a landing gear. And that landing gear should interest some of you young inventors, because it might give you the key to the producing of a landing gear superior to any that we have on any ship in this country. It was a three-point landing gear, and it consisted of what you and I would call a steel ball, about that diameter, and it set in a fulcrum which, on measurement, went over the circumference. Lifting the ship, you could whirl that ball, and that ball would spin for 15 to 20 minutes before it stopped. In experimenting with the spinning action of that ball, a very interesting thing was discovered. If all the balls were spun in the same direction, any number of men could not tilt the ship in either direction. Therefore, either gyroscopically or magnetically, those balls were provided with the mechanism of balance, so that in any direction this ship wanted to land under any conditions, being as small and as light as it was, and it was 36 feet in diameter, they could land. These scientists were very much intrigued with this landing device, because in the landing of planes in this country, we always have the problem of tipping over and landing in different kinds of winds. They have to come in, and here would be the solution if they could develop the ways and means of balancing our own landing gear on that magnetic or gyroscopic principle, which would keep them from tilting, and they landed. Now I hesitate to tell you of another ship that landed, because the 8 people present who viewed this ship for a long time decided that it would not be a good idea to admit their experience. So you gentlemen and you ladies can discount it as you see fit. This took place near one of the proving grounds of our government in guided missile research. And these scientists were engaged in certain experiments on the proving ground at the time. They had finished their work and were going back to their cars, and they walked up on the ship on the ground with the door open and no one in it. Well, they thought, we found something sure enough now. The little fellows are gone. And hardly had they uttered that expression when about as far from here to the building over there, one of the men said, "There they stand now." And 6 of these little fellows were standing there. They had found out how to get out of their cabin and into our atmospheric conditions safely. Well, I've talked to several of these gentlemen, and they had various feelings about what they were looking at. They actually started towards these little fellows, and one of these men, and some of you gentlemen can probably do the same thing. I can't do it, but you can whistle through your teeth and they can hear you half a mile. And one of these fellows whistled at these fellows, whereupon they started to run. And these 8 giants to these little fellows started to run also. They hadn't covered 50 feet of ground when suddenly there wasn't any little men. Now you can imagine how you would feel if you were chasing a little fellow on the ground and suddenly he's no more. Most of the hair on the heads of these great scientists stood up. One of them said, "Let's get away from here now." And without any further ado, they got in their cars and they took off. They didn't go back to examine the ship standing 100 feet away at all. Well, they got in and they filed their reports, and they said, "Now let's keep this to ourselves because they'll probably send us down to the psychopathic wards and tie us up in straitjackets." They then decided to go back to the scene. They drove out, and the ship was gone. Therefore, you gentlemen can judge for yourselves whether or not they didn't do a pretty good stunt, as among themselves they said, "Let's just forget this." Now, gentlemen, ladies, I've given you some of the high points in connection with the flying saucers that come and go. They are real, and in conclusion, I would like for you to think on this line. Why do they call them flying saucers? The hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who in the past 2.5 years have reported the seeing of these objects flying in the sky. Hundreds of them trained observers, hundreds of them trained pilots, men who through the war were trained at great distances to recognize instantly the make of any ship flying in the air because of the fact that we were at war. Each and every one of these people, almost without exception, described these ships as looking like saucers flying through the air. Why do they say that? Because, gentlemen, that's what they look like. That's what they literally are. And if you gentlemen on the athletic field will stop to think for a minute as to the flight of the discus, you will see that this saucer whirling in the air as a means of propulsion, guided by magnetic control, and unquestionably in our minds the gears that set in the bottom of the saucers allow them to break the sides and change their direction in any manner they see fit. You are now acquainted with a few of the facts, a few of the findings, a few of the deductions on this, we think, the first step in intercommunication between the planets of this universe. I thank you, gentlemen.
Now you have something to put your teeth into and to think about sometime very critically in your class. I've enjoyed this experience immensely. The class that I have in basic science, we have our test scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. I'll see you then.
Once you have found her, never let her go. Thank you.
With that great big bundle of joy, he pops a boogie-woogie rag, the Chattanooga shoeshine boy.
Very fine, Little John, very fine. Little John, who definitely is not that, and Chattanooga shoeshine boy. Well, let's change both our theme and tempo just a bit and bring Connie Addison back to the microphone with that very popular ballad of several seasons ago, Now Is the Hour.
Now is the hour for us to say goodbye. Soon you'll be sailing far across the sea. While you're away, oh then remember me. When you return, you'll find me waiting here.
Definitely one of the finest receptions we've had for a band and its return engagement here at the Rainbow Ballroom. Lee Williams and his Stepping Stone Music. Get in all the nights you can, listening and dancing to this fine band at the Rainbow. Remember, their engagement runs through next Friday night, so you have the balance of this evening until midnight, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, and next Friday, right, Lee? Not too many nights. Get in as many as you can with Lee Williams and his Stepping Stone Music. And right now, it's Bye Bye Blues. Spruce 2991. That's the number to call right now, ladies and gentlemen, and make your reservations for your weekend dancing parties here at the Rainbow Ballroom. And all indications are for some very big crowd for Lee Williams' weekend here at the Rainbow, so get yours in now. Spruce 2991. Reserve your favorite booth or table for Saturday or Sunday nights, or both. And now it's Rainbow Medley time. Lee Williams and There's No Tomorrow. To sing Open Door, Open Arms.
Open door, open arms, wait for your safe return. Day and night, there's a light in my heart that will burn. Let the light lead you home through your wide open door, straight into my open arms forevermore. They say one winter day he left his loved one with a vow he'd return when the fields were green with spring. Though springtime came, it didn't bring her loved one. Now at night from her door you can clearly hear her sing. Lead you home through your wide open door, straight into my open arms forevermore.
A half hour, ladies and gentlemen, of Lee Williams and the stepping tone music, coming to you direct from the West Ballroom Beautiful, the Rainbow, 5th and Broadway in Mile High, Denver. Dancing this evening, Lee's opening night continues until midnight. Next dancing night, tomorrow, Saturday night, starting at 8:30. Lee's engagement is very limited here at the Rainbow. Get in as many nights as you can with his fine music. Until tomorrow night, same time, these stations, when we'll bring you more of Lee Williams and his stepping tone music. This is Herb Trackman bidding you good night and good dancing always at the Rainbow. This is the Columbine Network.
This is KMYR Denver.
20% to the potential home market of the United States by that simple financial maneuver. That and that alone, together with some slight decrease in costs, was responsible for the change in the real estate climate in mid-1949. It's responsible for the fact that the first part of 1950 is ahead of 49 in terms of real estate activity, in building, in other factors. Also, from a direct political point of view, the government liberalized the 608 lending procedure. We did not build more single-family homes in the United States in 1949 than we did in 48. We built some less. But we did build a very sharply increased total of apartments, which came out as the result of the $8,100 per unit loan and the availability of financing under 608. That liberality of financing was responsible for a tremendous amount of construction in the rental housing market. We haven't time in our discussion today to talk about the impact of that construction on the market. But let it be said that right now and for the foreseeable future, except that 608, I believe, will be tightened up somewhat, perhaps brought out in another form within the next month. I hope not quite as liberal from the point of view of its ultimate impact on the market. Nonetheless, there in the next few months will be very liberal financing available. Most of the lending agencies are thinking about lower interest rates. The increased competition for loans is on the horizon and is being evidenced every day in the real estate markets of the nation. A new liberality also of loan percentage to a total appraised value is being evidenced on these markets. The new building of the United States has started out very sharply in excess of the building a year ago, and unquestionably in the next few months will stay there. Now, there are certain signs, however. We've got the stethoscope on the man who feels very good now, but we're giving him a periodical examination. There are certain things about real estate that are signs that you ought to know about. One thing, real estate has some chronic ailments that it's had for years, and we check up on them every year to see how they're doing, and they're not doing so well.